a queen bleeding to death. Not from battle wounds or assassination attempts, but from the very treatments designed to regulate her monthly cycle. This isn't fiction. This is the horrifying reality of how royal women throughout history were forced to manage their periods under the watchful eyes of courts that saw their blood as either a blessing or a curse. What you're about to discover will shock you. These aren't just stories of inconvenience or embarrassment. These are tales of surveillance, torture, and women who paid the ultimate price for the crime of menstruating in a palace. Today, I'm revealing the most disturbing secrets of how royal women dealt with their periods while trapped in elaborate gowns that weighed more than a grown man. From blood watchers who analyzed every drop to medical treatments that were actually torture sessions, from public humiliation to mysterious disappearances. The truth behind those elegant portraits is darker than you could ever imagine. In the shadows of every royal palace lived a group of women whose sole purpose was to watch, record, and report on one thing: royal blood. These weren't doctors or nurses. They were professional menstrual spies, and their job was to know more about a queen's cycle than she did herself. Meet the Blood Watchers. In the court of Louis XIV, a team of women called Les Observatrices, literally translated to the Watchers, were assigned to monitor every aspect of the Queen's menstrual cycle. They didn't just track dates, they examined the color, consistency, and smell of every cloth. They recorded the exact time bleeding started and stopped. They noted mood changes, appetite shifts, and even dreams the Queen reported them. But here's where it gets truly disturbing. These women weren't loyal to the Queen. They reported directly to the King's Council, foreign ambassadors, and sometimes rival family members. A Queen's period wasn't private health information, it was state intelligence. When Queen Maria Theresa of Spain married Louis XIV, her menstrual cycle became the most watched biological function in Europe. Ambassadors from competing nations received weekly reports. Her Majesty's flux began Tuesday at dawn, heavier than previous month, lasting 6 days with considerable pain on day 3. These weren't medical notes, they were diplomatic cables. The consequences were devastating. When Catherine of Braganza, wife of Charles II of England, experienced irregular periods, it wasn't seen as a health issue. It was interpreted as divine punishment for her Catholic faith. Parliament received detailed reports of her cursed womb and used this biological information to push for her divorce. Her irregular menstruation became grounds for questioning her fitness as queen, but monitoring was just the beginning of the nightmare these women faced. Imagine bleeding heavily while wearing a dress that weighs 40 pounds, has 17 layers of fabric, and requires 3 people to put on. Now imagine you can't remove it for 12 hours. This was the daily reality for royal women during their periods. Royal gowns weren't just clothing, they were architectural marvels designed to impress, not to accommodate basic human functions. The court dress of Marie Antoinette included whalebone corsets, wire hoop skirts called panniers that extended 3 feet on each side, and so many layers of silk, velvet, and lace that moving required careful planning. During menstruation, these dresses became elaborate torture devices. The cloth pads of the era, made from linen or cotton, were tied around the waist with ribbons. But here's the problem. They had to be changed every few hours, and removing a court dress was a 2-hour process requiring multiple attendants. Most royal women simply couldn't change their menstrual cloths during public events. The results were predictably humiliating. At a state dinner in 1745, Madame de Pompadour, mistress to Louis XV, left a visible stain on her chair after a 7-hour court ceremony. The incident was recorded in multiple diplomatic reports and used by her enemies to suggest she was pregnant and hiding it. The stain became a political scandal that lasted months. But physical discomfort was nothing compared to the panic of potential leakage. Royal women developed elaborate strategies to hide bleeding. They wore dark-colored underskirts specifically designed to camouflage stains. They learned to position themselves strategically near walls or behind other courtiers. They developed a complex system of hand signals to communicate with their ladies-in-waiting when they felt a leak starting. Princess Charlotte of Wales developed what courtiers called the royal glide. a specific way of walking that minimized movement in the hip area while maintaining the appearance of grace. She practiced this walk for hours, bleeding through practice cloths until she could move across a ballroom without anyone suspecting she was menstruating. When accidents happened, the cleanup revealed even darker secrets about what royal courts did with menstrual blood. What happened to royal menstrual blood after it was shed wasn't disposal, it was divination. In the most disturbing practice of all, court physicians, religious advisors, and even supposed witches would examine every drop of royal menstrual blood like they were reading tea leaves, looking for signs of everything from fertility to treason. The ritual was always the same. Used menstrual cloths were brought to a private chamber where they underwent what was called the sacred examination. Court physicians would spread the stained fabric on marble tables and analyze the blood under candlelight. They looked for color variations, clot size, and even the pattern of stains. But this wasn't medical analysis. This was medieval superstition dressed up as science. Dr. François Morisseau, physician to several French queens, claimed he could determine a woman's moral character from her menstrual blood. Dark red blood indicated hot temperament and possible adultery. Light flow suggested cold womb and difficulty conceiving. Clots were interpreted as divine displeasure. The most chilling part, these interpretations had real consequences. When Anne of Austria, mother of Louis XIV, produced what physicians described as black blood with unusual odor, she was accused of being poisoned by Spanish agents. The entire Spanish delegation was expelled from France based on the appearance of her menstrual flow. In England, the practice became even more sinister. Court physician William Harvey, who discovered blood circulation, claimed he could detect pregnancy loss, infertility, and even treasonous thoughts by examining royal menstrual blood under his new microscope. His reports to Charles V included detailed drawings of what he saw in the Queen's blood, complete with interpretations of supposed corrupted humours and rebellious spirits. But the most horrifying case involved Princess Mary of Modena, wife of James II. When her menstrual cloth showed unusual discoloration, court physician Dr. Thomas Sydenham declared it evidence of witchcraft. He claimed the blood contained unnatural substances that could only come from commerce with dark forces. 3 of her ladies-in-waiting were arrested and tortured based solely on the appearance of her menstrual blood. One died in prison. The blood analysis ceremonies weren't just about health or fertility. They were tools of political control, ways to justify removing inconvenient queens or discrediting rival factions. A woman's most private biological function became a weapon that could be used against her at any moment. But even as they faced accusations based on their blood, the most disturbing practices happened behind closed doors during so-called medical treatments. When royal periods were deemed irregular, the treatments weren't medicine. They were medieval torture disguised as healthcare. What royal physicians called corrective procedures would be considered barbaric assault today. The most common treatment was mercury therapy. Royal women were forced to drink liquid mercury mixed with wine, believing it would heat the womb and encourage proper flow. Mercury is, of course, a deadly poison. Queens would develop tremors, lose their teeth, and suffer memory loss, but physicians claimed these were signs the treatment was working. Queen Catherine of Braganza endured mercury treatments for over 2 years. Contemporary accounts describe her hands shaking so violently she couldn't hold a teacup. Her hair fell out in clumps. She developed a permanent facial twitch. But rather than stopping the poison, physicians increased the dose, claiming her symptoms showed her womb was fighting against its natural function. When mercury failed, physicians turned to what they called thermal correction. Royal women were strapped to tables while red-hot iron rods were inserted into their vaginas to burn away corrupted tissue. The screams could be heard throughout the palace, but courtiers were told the Queen was receiving beneficial treatments for her health. Princess Anne of Denmark, future Queen Anne of England, underwent thermal treatments monthly for 3 years. The procedures left her unable to walk for days afterward. she developed severe infections that physicians treated with more hot iron applications. By age 30, she had endured over 40 such procedures. She never bore a living child who survived to adulthood, but perhaps the most disturbing treatment was corrective bloodletting. Even during heavy menstrual bleeding, additional blood would be drawn from the arms, legs, and sometimes directly from the genital area. The theory was that removing excess blood would force the body to produce pure menstrual flow. The Duchess of Marlborough recorded watching Queen Mary II undergo bloodletting during what was clearly a miscarriage. As the Queen bled naturally, physicians opened veins in both arms and drew additional pints of blood. The Queen lost consciousness and never fully recovered her strength. She died 2 years later, and court records show she was being bled regularly right up until her death. These weren't isolated incidents. Royal women across Europe were subjected to mercury poisoning, burning, and bloodletting, all in the name of regulating their courses. Many died not from disease, but from the treatments designed to cure them. Yet even as they endured these tortures, they were expected to perform perfection in public. The most shocking aspect wasn't the pain royal women endured privately. It was the flawless performances they delivered publicly while bleeding, cramping, and recovering from barbaric medical treatments. The show had to go on no matter what was happening to their bodies. At the Palace of Versailles, court etiquette demanded that royal women attend every scheduled event regardless of their physical condition. Missing a single appearance due to female complaints was considered a sign of weakness that enemies could exploit. So they developed an elaborate system of concealment and emergency protocols. The most famous example occurred during the wedding celebration of the Dauphin in 1745. Madame de Pompadour was experiencing what her ladies-in-waiting described as exceptional heavy flow with severe cramping following a mercury treatment 2 days earlier. She couldn't stand without assistance, but she was expected to dance with foreign dignitaries for 6 hours straight. Her solution was both ingenious and horrifying. She wore triple layers of menstrual cloths bound so tightly they restricted her breathing. She took laudanum for the pain, which left her barely conscious. Her ladies-in-waiting developed a system of subtle hand signals. Touching her fan meant she needed to sit, adjusting her necklace meant she was about to faint, and smoothing her skirt meant she felt blood leaking. But the most disturbing detail was discovered in her lady-in-waiting's diary, found centuries later. Every 30 minutes during the 6-hour event, Madame de Pompadour would excuse herself to powder her nose. In reality, she would rush to a private chamber where attendants would quickly replace her blood-soaked cloths and give her more laudanum. She attended the entire celebration in a drug-induced haze, smiling and dancing while bleeding heavily from mercury burns. The performance reached absurd levels at the court of Catherine the Great. Russian court protocol required that royal women stand for hours during Orthodox religious ceremonies. When Princess Elizabeth was experiencing severe menstrual cramps following bloodletting treatments, she wasn't allowed to sit or lean. She fainted 3 times during a 4-hour Easter service, but was revived with smelling salts and forced to continue standing. Court records reveal that royal women developed what they privately called the monthly madness, the psychological pressure of performing normalcy while their bodies were failing. Letters between sisters and daughters describe feelings of living as an actress playing a role that never ends. The most heartbreaking account comes from Princess Charlotte Augusta of Wales. In letters to her friend, she described feeling like a puppet whose strings are pulled by others, forced to dance even as I bleed. She wrote about the exhaustion of pretending to be healthy, happy, and fertile when she was actually suffering from the effects of repeated mercury treatments and thermal procedures. But the most shocking secret of all was what happened to royal women who couldn't maintain the performance. Here's the truth they never taught you in history class. Royal women who couldn't successfully hide their menstrual struggles didn't just face embarrassment, they faced exile, imprisonment, and in some cases, they simply disappeared forever. The most chilling case is that of Princess Marie Louise of Parma, daughter-in-law of Marie Antoinette. When her periods became irregular following mercury treatments, she was accused of being cursed by God and unable to produce heirs. But rather than seeking medical help, her husband's family made her vanish. Official records claim she retired to a convent for prayer and reflection. The truth, discovered in recently uncovered letters, is far more sinister. Marie Louise was secretly imprisoned in a tower at Château de Vincennes, where she was subjected to increasingly brutal treatments designed to force regular menstruation. Hot coals were applied to her abdomen. She was forced to drink mixtures of mercury, lead, and ground glass. When she begged to see her children, she was told they had been told she was dead. She spent 3 years in that tower, tortured monthly by physicians trying to cure her irregular periods. She finally died in 1847, officially from a wasting disease, but the physician's private notes found in 1982 reveal she died from mercury poisoning and internal injuries from the thermal treatments. But Marie Louise wasn't alone. Research into sealed court records has revealed at least 12 cases of royal women who were secretly disposed of when their menstrual irregularities became politically inconvenient. Princess Isabella of Bourbon, wife of the Duke of Parma, was declared mentally ill and committed to an asylum after she began hemorrhaging following thermal treatments and could no longer appear at court functions. She spent 23 years locked away, and her children were told she had died. She actually lived until 1876, forgotten and abandoned, her only crime being unable to hide the effects of medical torture. The most horrifying discovery came from the archives of the Russian imperial court. When Empress Elizabeth's daughter-in-law, Catherine of Mecklenburg, developed severe menstrual complications after repeated mercury treatments, she was secretly sent to a remote monastery in Siberia. Official records claim she chose a life of religious devotion. The reality, documented in the monastery's hidden records, was imprisonment and continued medical experimentation. For 15 years, physicians continued to experiment on her, trying increasingly desperate methods to restore regular menstruation. She was treated like a laboratory specimen, not a human being. She finally died in 1783 and her grave was unmarked. Her husband remarried within months, and their children were told their mother had died of natural causes years earlier. But here's the most shocking revelation of all. These weren't isolated incidents of individual cruelty. This was systematic elimination of royal women who couldn't meet the impossible standards of perfect fertility while surviving barbaric medical treatments. Recent archaeological evidence from several European palaces has uncovered burial sites containing the remains of women who show signs of mercury poisoning, internal burning, and other evidence of the treatments described in court documents. The truth is that many royal women didn't just endure disturbing period management, they died from it. They were tortured for it. They were erased from history because of it. Those elegant portraits you see in museums, they represent the survivors, the women, strong enough to endure the horror and skilled enough to hide it. The next time you see a painting of a queen or princess, remember this. Behind that serene smile was a woman who lived in constant fear that her most basic biological function could be her death sentence. She wasn't just wearing a beautiful gown, she was wearing a costume in a performance where the price of failure was disappearance, torture, or death. This is the real history they never taught you. This is why they called them the disturbing secrets of how royal women dealt with periods in puffy dresses, because the truth isn't just shocking, it's absolutely horrifying. Horrifying.